Hello, welcome to the CreativeStudio 4.0 demonstration. Gamble and Statler Stitcher have prepared a lot of wonderful new features that will save you time and make your quilting more creative. I'm Matt Sherman, author of CreativeStudio. We've added a new virtual stitch out, and if you right click in the open CAD you can get the option of virtual stitch out. An easier way is just to click F2, and you click F2 and it'll show you what how it's gonna sew. If it reaches a jump stitch, it'll beep at you, which is useful if you're designing CAD work. I'll go ahead and make you up something now where it's jumping wrong. Okay, I've got this pattern here, and I'm going to go ahead and divide it, and then I'm going to reverse start and end on this. And obviously this has been wrong because it'll go here and it'll jump over, then come over here. And now I'm going to press F2 to get a virtual stitch out. I don't know if you could hear that donk or beep, that whenever it jumps over, that's your warning that you have a jump stitch. Now it's normal between patterns, but you want to listen for it really careful and watch for that jump whenever you're designing your own patterns. Moving a quilting machine head around all day can be a little tiresome, and so we've added a feature to make it a lot easier for you. And what this is called Power Assist, and it adds a small amount of voltage to the motors as you move to compensate for the friction and mass of the machine. So it makes it feel like you're moving the machine with the belts off, even though the belts are on. So this pretty much eliminates the need to take the belts on and off. And this is how you use it. You'll go under Tools, Calibrate Power Assist. You need to do this at least once. And then you'll need to click Auto Calibrate. To calibrate Power Assist, move the stitcher to the middle front. Be sure the head is free to move. Yes to start. In other words, you don't want any obstructions or anything laying on the quilt, rulers or anything in the way. Make sure that the take-up roller is not dragging on the head, because that'll affect all these calculations. All right, and click Yes. My head's now moving to the right. It'll move to the right for about 10-12 inches. Then it'll move back to where it started. And what it's doing is it's determining how much effort it takes to move the machine. Now it's moving to the back about 10-12 inches. And now it's moving to the front. Just be patient with it during this process. Okay, the machine's finished calibrating. And here's the values for the left and for the right. The numbers themselves don't really matter that much. Basically, what you want to do is you want to try it. And it kind of tells you what to do here. Turn on Power Assist, move head left to right, front to back. If the head moves too frilly or is jittery, reduce the values below. If the head is stiff to move, then increase the values. So I'm turning on Power Assist. I'm listening for any ticking or vibration in the machine or anything like that. I don't see that. So I'm going to go ahead and move the head around. It moves very freely. It's a little bit too free left to right, so I'm going to reduce the number down a little bit. Like that. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. So I was at 11 and 12. And then I'm going to turn Power Assist back on. I'm going to try that. And I like this better. It feels better. Okay? And then sorry about that. Having problems with this minimizing. I'll get with the form staying topmost. I'll get that fixed before I release it to you guys. Okay, and then you'll exit this form. When you exit the form, Power Assist does turn back off so that the values can be set, and then you'll need to come in here and turn it back on. And then CreativeStudio will remember from now on whether you want it to be on and off. CreativeStudio automatically turns it off whenever it's sewing automatic patterns, obviously. But then when you get done with the automatic patterns, it'll turn back on. You can use it in constant speed, but it does not work in based or regulated. We've added a new pattern to boundary method. The standard method is what you've been using up till now, and I'll go ahead and show you what will happen. I have the margin set to 0 here. This block's not square. And then it places it in there the best it can, and then it becomes trapped. Okay. We'll go ahead and set this aside for reference. And I'm going to change the pattern to boundary type to stretch. I'm going to say pattern to boundary. And this is a lot better. It fills the space a lot better. It compensates for irregularly spaced piecing much better. You can even use the stretch to make something that would normally go in a square pattern fit in a triangular pattern. Now here I have margin off and freeze aspect off in order to achieve this fit. And here's the Statler Angel going into the same freeze aspect off, margin off. So you can see it really can push the limits of patterns a lot. Along with the pattern to boundary stretch, there's also a new handle that allows you to stretch the pattern. And with this, if you move the handle sideways, you can take and stretch or warp patterns around. And make them do what you want them to do. The corners will move the pattern and maintain the opposite corner. So going in, we'll create the effect you see here. Going out, we'll stretch it out. Okay. Hit undo a couple of times. The rotation works like normal rotation, and so does the move. These handles can push the pattern in. They can also go left to right. Now you see what happened there? It doesn't take much movement, so you need to be careful of that. If it gets out of control, like something like this, just hit Control Z and bring it back, and then just be a little bit more cautious as you move. Try to do a slower movement to get what you need. We've added a new, quicker method for doing edge-to-edge sewing. It's somewhat reminiscent of the end of previous set from Precision Stitch. So the way it works is here I've started setting up an edge-to-edge. I've already clicked my 4 corners. I'm going to say a quilt length of 60 inches, let's say. Let's go ahead and fill the patterns out. And then for registration type, I'm going to pick the new type of end of set. Okay. Yeah, the registration marks go away. And now I can press quilt. I'll let that finish and then I'll come back. Okay, the edge to edge is finishing up now. I'll click OK to cut the bobbin thread. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll my quilt, but I need to leave this endpoint sticking out past the take-up roller. So I'm going to go ahead and roll my quilt and move the head up. Okay, the needle is now at the end of set on the rolled up last row right here. This one's been rolled up to here. So now I'm going to press continue, and it makes sure that you've done what you're supposed to do. Have you rolled your quilt and position your needle at the last sewn pattern's endpoint? And why, yes, I have. I have done that. If you haven't done that, you'd want to go ahead and do that now. But don't click yes until your needles or your laser light or your needle is right on the endpoint. Okay, and you can see what happened. It went ahead and moved up, and then you can start quilting the next row. Of course, to be used for edge to edge, the end of your pattern will need to be at the bottom of the pattern, not at the top. You can use the negative vertical height after you calculate the edge to edge to flip it down, or you can flip it and save it as a CSQ, or you can use one of the other registration methods. You can also use this end of set on any group. You can lay out a whole cloth, and when you get to the last pattern that you can fit on it, you can go ahead and roll it, put the needle by the end point, and then click continue, and it'll automatically use the edge to edge end of set, even on non edge to edge patterns. So it's made this continue button be useful throughout the software instead of just for edge to edge. So that's a nice addition. With the new convert tool, it is now possible to convert a trim, boundary, or pattern into a trim, boundary, pattern, or an outline. This will greatly save you time when you're doing custom work. It is no longer necessary to outline an applique with a P2P line and then later create the same geometry as a trim. Now you can just convert the trim to a P2P line, or you can convert the P2P line to a trim. Okay, so I have this trim that's around my applique, and I've used it, and now I want to sew around the applique with a point-to-point line, which is pretty common. So you'll just right-click and then pick Convert Trim to Pattern. And there you go. There you have a sewable. I'll go ahead and toggle these as sewn so I can actually show you. You can also convert a pattern into a trim, and you'll notice that there's two different convert boxes. There's this box that comes up when you right-click a pattern, and then there's a box that comes up when you right-click and open CAD. And this is the one that'll come up if you're right-clicking just a boundary or a trim. Also, you'll notice that it grays out the ones that aren't available. You have to select the pattern. So if I want to do something to this one, even if I right-click over here, it's going to be converting that pattern I selected. So I can convert the pattern to a trim. There's my trim. Just to show you that it is a trim. Here, I'll dump a pattern behind it. Okay, and I use Control-Z to get back out of there. I can convert a pattern to a boundary. And here, to prove to you that it's a boundary, I'm going to do a pattern to boundary. The baselines here, this is the reason the angel turned sideways. Okay, we'll undo that. And we can also, I have to show you out here, I'm going to divide pattern, and see how there's only 4 nodes on this circle? If you want to have more places to break it up, you can convert to a curve, and this is a fitted curve. And if we say divide pattern now, we've got a lot more nodes, which is pretty helpful when you're doing some of the work you might need to do with pattern editing and stuff like that. Now it is still a true curve, and if we expand this out, it'll still be a curve. And you can convert a boundary to a pattern. There's a pattern there. So order. Showing that it's a pattern. I'm going to Control-Z that, and you can convert a boundary to a trim. And there's the angel behind there. Okay, so there's really no limit to what you can convert anything to anything now inside CreativeStudio, and this will really speed up your quilt production work, and especially any custom work you're doing. And the last convert is a convert pattern to outline. This will remove all the internal parts of the pattern and just leave a shadow of the pattern to simplify it. You'll notice that it did take just a little bit of time. This is a rather simple pattern. On a more complex pattern, outlining it would take more time. Same thing when you convert a pattern to a boundary or a pattern to a trim. Basically, it's converting it to an outline and removing all the internal detail. That does take a little bit of time. The new fill feature shows outside or inside of a boundary. It works similar to trim, but it won't tie off. Let me give you a demonstration. Here I have a circle that I use the new convert feature I showed you earlier. It's a geometric circle. I converted it to a boundary. So you need to start with a boundary, either one you've converted from a pattern or from a trim, or one that you've clicked out using your head around an applique, for example. So now I'm going to put this meander behind the quilt, and like that. Okay. So you've got your boundary and you've got your patterns. You need to select all the patterns, right click them, click fill inside, that'll do a fill inside the circle. Click fill outside, that'll do a fill on the outside of the circle. I have an applique in the middle of the circle, so I'm going to click outside. Now this does take a little while, so be patient. Obviously, the more you have going on, the longer it takes. I have noticed that a curved boundary like this circle does take a little bit longer than more straight sides. Okay, but there we go. We're finally done. I'm going to press Escape to deselect. You notice that this is all one pattern now. It automatically combined it. So that's something you need to watch for. Okay, we're going to press F2 to check. And I'm going to press the plus sign to speed it up. Okay, here it is following the boundary. No tie-offs there. Now it'll move to the next point in the pattern, in the order in which it originally would have sewn. It won't necessarily move, like you noticed it skipped this area here and now it's coming back to it. If it would have gone just to the next area, it would miss areas that it could sew. So you will get some overlap stitching, like through this area here. Obviously it sewed up, did that, came back down, so there's doubled up. So that's something you'll need to be aware of. And here's an example of fill inside. Select them all, fill inside. Wait for a while. And we're going to click F2 to check it. So it's like a trim, but there's no tie-offs. Right here, there must have been a very small amount. Yeah, there's a very small amount of the pattern left. Okay, this is another example using fill. I've got an applique circle in the middle, and then I've got a poorly placed block that I have to fit into. So just click fill inside, and CreativeStudio will realize that two boundaries are in there. And I'll click F2 so you can see it so. Something I've noticed about this for my demo purposes that the virtual sew is much slower when I'm recording. So it'll be faster on your computer. There you go. And if the same setup, you click fill outside, you'll only get the outside. It'll pick the outermost boundary and it'll fill to that. Obviously you wouldn't want that. So hit Control Z. To use the new sew overlap feature, go into Tools, Technical Support, Controller Definition, and the default set for 1/8 of an inch. And if you're okay with that, you really don't need to come in here. For our discussion, I'm going to go ahead and make it a 1/2 inch, which is way too big, but I want to make sure that it'll show up as I'm sewing around it. And you'll hit File, Save and Close. And then you'll press Quilt. And zoom this out a little so you can. Okay, do you see this little part that's red right here? Hopefully you can see that. This is the part where it went and sewed all the way around. This is a really small circle, it's only 2 inches around. And then I set the overlap for a 1/2 inch, so it continues sewing for another 1/2 inch into the circle. And so this will get rid of any gap. It's really good for echoes. To turn it off, if you don't want to like this overlap, you go into Control Definition and you just set this to 0. File, Save and Close. And now when it sews, it will stop here and not sew with the overlap. Notice how CreativeStudio starts now in standalone mode. Normally you would have messages here, but this time it goes straight into SAM, standalone mode, which we oftentimes refer to as SAM, and it doesn't ask you for an encryption number. Now, if I click on this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll actually open it. If I open this 00023, it won't open it. And the reason it's able to open this pattern and open SAM without any prompts, even though this computer is defined to connect to a stitcher, which normally even gives you an extra prompt, is we now have this new checkbox called standalone mode, and you can also enter the controller number. And that'll allow CreativeStudio to start with no prompts and go right into getting to work. Also in SAM, notice that more buttons are now activated. We have boundary, like what we've had in the past. I'm going to draw out a boundary real quick here. There's pattern to boundary like usual, with the stretch and the standard. And then there's quilt. And you might think, well, I'm in SAM, I'm not connected to a stitcher. What's quilt going to do? Well, it's going to call that virtual stitch out I showed you earlier. Remember, plus increases the speed, and you'll hear a beep whenever it makes a jump stitch. Escape to exit the virtual stitch out. Point-to-point line will call the draw sewable P2P line, and then the icon for P2P with the set to pattern, we'll call this P2P pattern. So here's the line, and it draws a sewable line. I'll delete the R so you can see. I'll press F2 for the virtual stitch out, and there it is, sewing that line. I'll now switch to pattern, and I have a P2P pattern selected here. I'm going to turn on my grid snap. Right click to end, right click again to end the P2P pattern function. And there you have your P2P pattern. Repeat patterns does this regular thing of placing the pattern. In SAM mode, it's always relative to the origin, and this is what this little purple line here is. I get a lot of questions about that. There's actually a small dot here, and there's arrow up here that's pointing in the positive X and positive Y direction. So that's what that little purple crayon's about. And there it's placed in the upper left-hand corner. The trim icon we'll call the draw trim, the Alt-T. I'll turn off my grid snap, and you can trim out stuff. The measure icon calls the underneath the draw, the measure, which will measure things on the CAD. It brings up a little box down here that shows your width and height. I'm going to endpoint snap so I can see how far it is from here to here. And it's 7.07 inches. And finally, to wrap up, just a few of the other small items we added. Designer pauses are stops that are put in by designers so that the user can do something. In this case, they're changing color of thread between the teddy bear and the frame. Occasionally, users don't want to stop there, and so we've added, under Options, Remove Designer Pauses. And now it won't stop there. Another option that designers have is that they'll put no-sew lead in and lead outs. Sometimes you don't want the no-sew lead in and lead out. You don't want the endpoint to be out here in space. You actually want it to be on the pattern. So you can go to Options, Remove Designer Pauses. Oh, I'm sorry. Options, Remove No-sews. And there you go. Now this pattern must start and end here in the middle. Yeah, it does. And the no-sews were to bring it out to make it a point-to-point. But if you don't want it to be a point-to-point, and you don't want the no-sew lead in and lead out, then that's an option for you. Well, that's the major new features in version 4. We've put a lot of multi-purpose tools in this version. It's really going to be up to you, the quilter, to determine the best way to use the new tools. I've given you a few ideas on these tools, but I know how creative you quilters are, and you're going to come up with some wonderful new ideas how to use them. I greatly thank you for your support, and I appreciate you all. Have fun, happy quilting, and bye.